The moment Nora stepped inside the house, she felt it. An eerie presence that lingered just beyond the corner of her vision. The air was thick, heavy with the kind of silence that only happens when something is watching. She had never been one to believe in ghosts, but this place, it unnerved her. The walls creaked, the floorboards groaned under her feet. It was as though the house itself was alive, and she was its prey. She had bought this house hoping for a fresh start, a place to leave her past behind. But now, every room felt like a memory, a whisper of something that should not be there. She rubbed her arms, trying to shake the chill, but it only grew stronger. Something was wrong. The house seemed to pulse with an energy she couldn't understand. She tried to brush it off as imagination, but the weight of it pressed against her chest, making it hard to breathe. The shadows in the corners of the rooms didn't help either. They moved. She couldn't be sure, but they were there lurking. With every step, Nora could feel the weight of something ancient, something malevolent, watching her. She turned toward the staircase. A single light flickered at the top, casting an unsettling glow on the walls. It was her first night here, and already, it felt like the house had a story of its own to tell. But she didn't want to know what it was. Nora didn't know how long she had been standing there, staring into the darkness. It felt like hours had passed, but when she glanced at the clock, only minutes had ticked by. The silence was suffocating, and the house seemed to close in on her. A draft swirled through the air, cold and unnatural, making her skin prickle. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she tried to stay calm. This was just nerves. She was alone in an unfamiliar place. It was easy for the mind to wander and conjure up things that weren't there. But that shadow, that fleeting glimpse of movement, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every corner of the house felt like a trap, and she was the prey. She glanced around, her breath shallow, trying to make sense of what she was feeling. But no answers came. Just the oppressive silence and the growing unease. She had to keep it together. She had to survive this place. The moment Nora turned to leave the room, she heard it, a soft creaking sound. She froze, her heart skipping a beat. The house seemed to be alive, reacting to her every move. She turned slowly, almost afraid of what she might see. But there was nothing, just the same empty room, the same flickering shadows. A trick of the light, she told herself. Yet, the creak continued louder now, coming from the hallway. It was as though the house was trying to tell her something, warning her, perhaps, or worse, welcoming her. Nora took a deep breath, shaking her head. "It's nothing," she whispered to herself. But she knew, deep down, that something was wrong. Her mind raced as she slowly walked toward the hallway, her every step cautious, hesitant. The feeling of being watched returned, stronger now, like invisible eyes were following her. She reached the doorway, peering into the dimly lit hallway. The air was thick with tension. Her heart pounded in her chest. This was no longer just her imagination. The house was hiding something, something dark, and she was certain it was about to make itself known. Nora stepped into the hallway, her footsteps slow and deliberate. The floor creaked under her weight, amplifying the stillness that enveloped her. Every sense was heightened, as though the air itself was charged with electricity. She could hear faint whispers, soft and unintelligible, echoing through the walls. It was almost as if the house was alive, breathing with her, reacting to her every move. Her hand brushed against the wall, feeling the cold, damp texture of the old plaster. There was something unsettling about it. She reached the end of the hallway and stopped before a door, half open. Her breath hitched as she hesitated. Behind the door, the shadows seemed to deepen, darker than the rest of the house. She pushed the door open further, only to be met with a sudden rush of cold air. The smell of dust and mildew filled her nostrils, and the sound of a distant thud echoed through the house. Her heart raced, and she quickly shut the door. But the whispers persisted, louder now, as if urging her to look deeper. Nora's breath came in short, sharp gasps. She turned away from the door, unable to shake the feeling that something, or someone, was behind her. The cold air wrapped around her like a vice, pressing down on her chest. She couldn't explain it, but she felt a presence, dark and oppressive, lingering just behind her. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she couldn't move. It was as though the house had a hold on her, keeping her in place. She heard a soft shuffle behind her, and before she could react, the lights went out, plunging the house into complete darkness. Panic surged through her, and she fumbled for her phone, hoping the flashlight would give her some sense of control. The screen flickered to life, casting a pale light on her trembling hands. But as the beam of light moved across the room, Nora froze. There, standing in the corner, was a figure, dark, indistinct, but unmistakably there. The light flickered again, and it was gone. She wasn't alone. The silence in the house had grown unbearable. Nora sat on the couch, staring at the shadows that danced across the walls. Every small noise seemed amplified now, each creak of the floorboards a haunting reminder of the presence that lingered in every corner. She had tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, but the fear was too real, too palpable. Her heart raced as she listened to the faintest whisper from the other room, something that couldn't possibly be explained. She jumped to her feet, panic surging through her veins. But there was nothing, only the oppressive stillness that surrounded her. Her mind raced as she moved through the house, checking every corner, every door, every window. She wasn't sure if she was searching for answers or just looking for reassurance. The house, however, offered no comfort. Every room seemed darker than the last, and the walls seemed to close in on her. It felt like a maze she couldn't escape. It wasn't just the house. Something was with her, watching, waiting. Nora had spent hours searching the house, yet the feeling of being watched never faded. It was inescapable. Each room she entered seemed to hold its breath as if waiting for something to happen. Her footsteps echoed loudly in the silence, a constant reminder that she was alone. But she wasn't alone, not really. She could feel it. She could hear it sometimes, soft whispers, faint enough to be mistaken for the wind but too clear to ignore. They came from the walls, from the corners of the rooms. Her mind played tricks, she told herself, trying to rationalize what she was experiencing. But as the night grew darker, the whispers grew louder, and the presence she had sensed earlier became more distinct, more menacing. Nora's fear was growing, but there was nothing she could do. She couldn't leave, not now. The house had its hold on her, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could resist its pull. Nora stopped in front of a door, her hand hovering over the knob. It was the last door she hadn't opened. It felt different from the others, colder somehow. She had avoided it earlier, instinctively knowing it wasn't a room she wanted to enter. But now, it seemed inevitable. The house was pushing her, urging her to open it. The whispering had grown louder again, more insistent. Nora's fingers trembled as she turned the handle, and the door creaked open slowly, revealing darkness beyond. She stepped inside, feeling the air grow even colder. The darkness seemed to swallow her, and the faint outline of a shadow moved in the far corner of the room. She gasped and stepped back, but the door slammed shut behind her with a force that shook the house. She was trapped. The shadows in the room moved, stretching across the walls like dark tendrils. Nora could feel them, curling around her, suffocating her. Her heart raced, and she gasped for air. But the weight of the darkness was too much. She turned around, trying to find the door, but the room seemed to have shifted. The walls were closing in, the floor was tilting, and the room no longer made sense. Her vision blurred as the whispers became deafening, each one a maddening plea. Nora reached for her phone, her hands shaking as she tried to turn on the flashlight, but the screen remained black. Panic surged through her, and she cried out for help, but there was no one to hear her. The house had swallowed her whole, and now, it was playing with her mind. She had to get out. She couldn't stay here. Not anymore. Nora's breath was ragged as she stumbled through the room, desperate to escape the shifting walls. She reached the door and pushed against it with all her strength, but it wouldn't budge. The house was holding her prisoner. The walls seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, and the whispers grew louder, more frantic. She was losing her grip on reality, each second blurring into the next. She couldn't tell if she was awake or dreaming. Her mind was unraveling, and she feared she might never escape. Then, just as she thought she would collapse from the weight of it all, the door suddenly swung open. But instead of the hallway, it opened into an even darker, more twisted part of the house. There was no way out. Not now. The house had claimed her. Nora sat on the floor, her back against the cold wall, her breath shallow. The house felt different now, heavier, more oppressive. The presence she had felt earlier was no longer subtle. It was inescapable, suffocating her every thought. She had tried to call for help, but the phone had no signal, and no one was answering at the door. The house had sealed her in. Every room she entered felt the same, dark, empty, and full of whispers. The journal she found earlier offered no answers, only more questions. It spoke of ancient rituals and dark forces, but the words were cryptic, written in a language that made her head ache. She couldn't decipher it, but she could feel it. The power, the evil that had been awakened. As she read through the pages again, her mind raced. Was she part of this? Was the demon tied to her? The realization hit her with a cold shiver. The house wasn't just haunted, it was connected to her. The presence she felt was tied to her bloodline, her family's past. She had come here to escape, but now it seemed like there was no escape at all. The whispers grew louder as Nora turned the pages, the words on the paper seeming to come alive in her mind. She could hear them in her head, a voice not her own, urging her to keep reading. She wanted to stop, to shut the book and forget, but she couldn't. Something inside her compelled her to continue. Each word she read seemed to strip away her sense of reality, as if the very act of reading was pulling her deeper into the house's dark history. The demon, it seemed, wasn't just a spirit trapped in the walls. It was a curse, passed down through generations, tied to the house and to her family. The more she read, the more she understood. This was no coincidence. Her family had unknowingly inherited this darkness, and now, it was waking up. The house was alive with it, and it was coming for her. Nora closed the journal with a snap, but the voice didn't stop. It was in her head, in her thoughts, twisting them into something unrecognizable. She felt the walls closing in again, but this time she wasn't sure she could get away. Nora couldn't stand it anymore. She had to get out, had to escape this nightmare. She stood up quickly, the journal slipping from her fingers and falling to the floor with a soft thud. The house seemed to respond, the air thickening as if the very walls were breathing with her. She rushed toward the front door, her footsteps echoing in the silent house. But when she reached the door, it wouldn't open. She yanked at the handle, her heart racing. It was locked. Her hands shook as she fumbled for the keys in her pocket, but they weren't there. Panic surged through her. She backed away from the door, feeling the weight of the house closing in around her. The whispers grew louder, louder than ever, until they filled her head, drowning out all rational thought. She fell to her knees, clutching her head in agony. This was it. She was trapped. The house had her now, and there was no escape. Desperation set in as Nora scrambled around the house, searching for any way out. The back door was locked, the windows sealed shut. She couldn't understand it. How was this happening? It was as if the house had turned against her. The walls seemed to shift, creating a maze that she couldn't navigate. Every time she thought she found an exit, it led to another dead end. Her breath was ragged, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. She didn't know how much longer she could keep running. The house was playing with her, toying with her mind. She felt like she was losing herself, like her thoughts weren't her own anymore. The whispers never stopped, constantly feeding her doubts, her fears. She had to do something. She couldn't just wait for the house to consume her. But what could she do? How could she fight something she didn't understand? Nora collapsed onto the floor, her body shaking with exhaustion. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. How had she gotten here? Why had she been drawn to this house? Was it fate? Or had she been brought here to face something much worse than she had imagined? The answers eluded her, just like everything else in this nightmare. She could feel it, though, the demon's presence. It was growing stronger, feeding on her fear. She could hear it now, clearer than before, a voice whispering from the shadows. "You can't escape." She jumped to her feet, her heart pounding in her chest. The voice wasn't just in her head. It was coming from the walls, from the very house itself. She knew then that the house wasn't just haunted, it was alive. And it was hungry. Nora couldn't believe what she was seeing. The figure in the corner of the room had become clearer, more defined. It was a man, or at least, something resembling one. His face was twisted in an expression of pure malice, eyes glowing an unnatural shade of red. His form was shadowy, like it was made of smoke and darkness, but there was a coldness to him that made her feel like she was suffocating. Her breath caught in her throat, and she instinctively backed away. But her legs wouldn't move. It was like the floor had frozen beneath her feet, locking her in place. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The whispers returned, louder now, urging her to come closer. She couldn't. She couldn't give in to whatever force had taken over this house. But she could feel it, pulling her toward the figure, toward the malevolent energy that radiated from him. Her mind screamed for her to run, to escape, but her body refused to listen. The demon was here, and it had found her. Nora's heart raced as she struggled to break free from the paralyzing fear that gripped her. The figure in the corner didn't move, but its presence seemed to fill the room, suffocating her. She had heard the stories, read the legends of demons who could control minds, bend reality to their will. But this felt different. The air was thick, heavy with an ancient power she couldn't comprehend. Her mind was spinning, the whispers becoming more coherent. "You belong to me," the voice whispered, sending a chill down her spine. She felt her body lurch forward against her will, moving toward the figure, as if her legs were no longer her own. It was as if the demon was feeding off her fear, growing stronger with each passing second. She could feel the weight of its gaze, the pull of its power, and the overwhelming urge to submit. But something deep inside her pushed back, refusing to let go. She had to fight. She had to fight this. The moment she stepped closer, the temperature in the room plummeted. A biting cold wrapped around her, seeping into her bones. Nora gasped, her breath coming out in visible puffs of air. She couldn't understand why she wasn't running. Her legs felt heavy, like lead, but her body was moving on its own accord. The whispers grew louder, more demanding. "You are mine." The voice, once distant, was now inside her head, swirling around her thoughts. Panic surged, and she tried to tear herself away, but the room seemed to stretch, the walls closing in, trapping her in this hellish nightmare. The figure's face remained expressionless, but its eyes burned with an intensity that made her skin crawl. She was no longer in control of her body. She felt the weight of the demon's presence pressing down on her, dragging her deeper into the darkness of the house. She had to find a way to break free. She had to resist. Nora's mind was spiraling. The air was thick with tension, and she felt her very thoughts being invaded. Every inch of her skin felt raw, every nerve on fire. The figure began to step forward, its shadow stretching across the room, engulfing her. She tried to scream, but the words stuck in her throat, too terrified to escape. She could feel it now. The pull of the demon's will, its grip on her soul tightening with every passing second. Her limbs were no longer her own, and the whispers, the words, they were too much. She could feel herself slipping away, her willpower crumbling under the weight of this evil. But somewhere deep within her, a flicker of defiance remained. She had to fight back, even if it meant facing the darkness head-on. This was her last chance. She couldn't let it take her. Not without a fight. Nora's pulse hammered in her ears as she reached into her pocket and pulled out the last thing she had left. A match. She didn't know what had driven her to grab it earlier, but now it felt like her only hope. She struck it against the wall, the flame sputtering to life. For a moment she was blinded by the brightness, But then the smoke cleared, and she saw it, the demon recoiling, as if the light burned it. The figure hissed, its glowing red eyes flashing with anger, but it didn't advance. The whispers grew frantic, more urgent, but the light from the match seemed to weaken its presence. Nora's hand shook, but she held the match steady, watching as the demon began to fade into the shadows. For the first time in what felt like forever, she had a sense of control. She wasn't defeated yet. But the match wouldn't last long, and she knew it. This was only a temporary solution. She had to find a way to banish the demon for good, or she'd be trapped in this nightmare forever. Nora's heart hammered in her chest as she stood in the center of the living room, the air thick with tension. The match in her hand flickered, its small flame barely holding back the overwhelming darkness that surrounded her. The demon was weakening, but not defeated. She could feel it, the malevolent presence growing more frantic, more desperate to reclaim its power. Her mind was spinning with possibilities. How could she banish this creature once and for all? Every step she took toward the door felt like she was wading through thick mud, the house itself fighting to keep her in its grip. She had no plan, no real weapon, just her will and a small match that wouldn't last forever. The whispers echoed around her, growing louder as the darkness began to push back. "You can't escape," the voice hissed. Nora gritted her teeth, fighting the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. "I won't let you win," she muttered, her grip tightening on the match. The flame flickered again, casting long shadows across the room. This was it, the moment she had feared, the moment she had to face the demon head-on. The match in Nora's hand burned down, the flame flickering and sputtering with each passing second. Her breath came in short, panicked bursts as she realized that the match was all she had left. The demon's presence was overwhelming, its shadow stretching across the room like a living thing. It seemed to grow in power with every heartbeat, feeding off her fear, growing stronger the more she resisted. Nora's mind raced. What if it was too late? What if she couldn't fight it off? The darkness in the room pulsed with a life of its own, a deep, throbbing pulse that felt like it was syncing with her heartbeat. The whispers filled her mind again, no longer just words, but visions of everything she feared, her family, her future, her soul. "You will never leave," the demon snarled, its voice a cruel echo in the room. Nora could feel the weight of its words, the cold truth that it had claimed so many before her. But she couldn't give in. Not now. Not when she was so close. Nora dropped the match, watching it fall to the floor in slow motion, the flame extinguishing the moment it hit the ground. The room was plunged back into total darkness, and for a split second, she thought she had lost. But then from the darkness, she felt a shift. A sudden gust of wind whipped through the room, and the air grew cold, almost icy. The demon hissed in frustration, the sound reverberating through the walls, but Nora wasn't done yet. She stood up straighter, her hands shaking, but her resolve solidifying. She had to push through the fear, had to fight the darkness with everything she had left. The air was thick with the demon's rage, but it also held something else now, a chance. She wasn't alone anymore. She could feel it, a presence behind her. It was the spirit of the house, the energy of those who had been trapped here before, offering her strength. "You won't take me," Nora whispered. With newfound determination, she took a step forward, ready to face the demon. The darkness began to recede as Nora stepped deeper into the room, her eyes narrowing with focus. The whispers had stopped. For a brief moment, the house was silent. She could feel the tension in the air, the battle between her and the demon now at its peak. The shadows that had once threatened to engulf her were now retreating, fading into the corners of the room. Nora knew this was her chance. The house had been feeding off her fear, but now, something had shifted. She was no longer afraid. She was angry. The demon's power had been waning since the moment she had started fighting back. She could feel the remnants of its presence still lingering, but it was weaker now, its hold over her slipping. The temperature in the room began to rise, the oppressive cold lifting. Nora clenched her fists. "This ends now," she muttered, and with a burst of strength she reached out, extending her hand toward the last vestiges of the demon's power. With a sudden force the last of the demon's presence shattered. The room was no longer dark, no longer filled with whispers. The silence that followed was deafening. Nora stood alone in the now calm room, her chest heaving with exhaustion. She had done it. She had driven the demon out, but at what cost? She could still feel the remnants of its touch, the lingering presence of something far darker, but for now she was free. Her mind was numb, her body aching from the fight, but there was a sense of victory, however fleeting. She had faced the darkness, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she could breathe. But even as she stood there, the stillness seemed to echo with a warning. The battle was over, but the war might not be. Nora stood in the center of the now quiet house, her breath still shaky, but her mind clearer than it had been in weeks. The battle was over. The demon was gone. At least, that's what she wanted to believe. But something felt off. A lingering unease gnawed at her, a sense that the victory had come at a cost she couldn't fully understand yet. The walls were no longer alive with whispers, the air no longer cold with the presence of something dark. But the house was far from peaceful. As Nora moved through the rooms, the stillness seemed unnatural, too heavy. She could feel it, the absence of something that had once been there. The house had been a battleground, and now it felt like a tomb. Her mind wandered to the journal she had found, to the rituals, the warnings that spoke of things beyond the demon. Had she sealed something else away? Something even darker? She wanted to leave, wanted to put this place behind her. But the weight of the house's history, its secrets, kept her tethered to this cursed place. She wasn't sure if she could ever truly escape. Nora couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, despite the silence that enveloped the house. It was the kind of quiet that felt suffocating, as though the walls were holding their breath, waiting for her to make a move. She turned, and for a moment, thought she saw something move in the corner of her eye. But when she looked again, it was gone. She had been seeing things, her mind playing tricks on her. Or maybe not. Maybe something had been left behind, something that couldn't be seen or understood, only felt. She walked through the house, each creak of the floor beneath her feet, louder than it had ever been before. She passed the staircase, now broken and unstable, and the once familiar hallway that led to the rooms she had tried to avoid. She reached the kitchen, the place where she had first felt the presence of the house's darkness. The windows were shattered, the air cold. But there was no demon here now, no shadows lurking in the corners. Just the remnants of a battle fought and won. Or so she thought. Nora knew the house had secrets, deep, dark secrets that went beyond the demon she had just banished. She could feel it in her bones, the knowledge that something had changed. She was different now, scarred by what she had endured, but she wasn't the same person who had walked into this house weeks ago. The fight for survival had forged a new strength within her, but it had also left cracks in her spirit. The journal she had read still haunted her thoughts, the cryptic warnings about forces beyond the demon, forces that could never be fully understood. She walked back into the living room, where the remnants of her battle still lingered in the air. The room felt different now, empty, as though the house had finally released its grip on her. But was she free? The silence spoke louder than any whisper could. She was no longer sure. She had fought the demon, but had she sealed it away for good? Or had she unknowingly opened a door to something far worse? The house seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something, and Nora couldn't shake the feeling that it was all a prelude to something even darker. The silence was deafening, but it wasn't the kind of peace that came with resolution. It was the stillness before a storm, the kind of quiet that made her skin crawl. She walked through the rooms once more, looking for any sign of the demon, but everything seemed normal, too normal. The house was empty, but it felt full, like the shadows had gathered in places she couldn't reach, just out of sight. She couldn't trust the silence. She had learned that much. As she reached the front door, she hesitated, her hand hovering over the handle. She wanted to leave, wanted to walk away from everything that had happened here. But there was something stopping her, a feeling deep inside that told her leaving wasn't the answer. The house was still part of her, and it always would be, whether she liked it or not. Nora finally stepped out into the night, the cold air hitting her like a wave. She stood on the porch for a moment, her eyes scanning the darkened landscape in front of her. The house behind her seemed to loom, even in the silence, as if it were still watching, waiting for her to come back. She had fought the demon, survived the horrors it had inflicted on her, but she knew deep down that the battle wasn't truly over. The house had left its mark on her, and no matter how far she ran, she would never truly escape. There would always be that lingering feeling, that sensation of being watched, even when there was no one around. She turned her back on the house and began to walk away, but as she moved, she heard a faint whisper carried by the wind. It was the same voice she had heard in the house. "You will return." Her heart skipped a beat, but she kept walking. She had to keep going. She had no other choice. Nora walked deeper into the woods, the trees stretching high above her. The faint whisper from the house still echoed in her mind. "You will return." She couldn't escape it. No matter how far she ran, the darkness would always find its way back. The journey was never meant to be an end, but a cycle, an endless loop that started with the house. Yet she walked forward, determined to break it. As she reached a clearing, the wind picked up, making the trees sway and groan. She paused for a moment, listening to the rustling leaves. There was no turning back. The house, the demon, it had been a part of her life. It was inescapable. Nora continued her walk, the chill of the night air biting at her skin. Every step felt like it brought her closer to something unknown, a force she couldn't name. The wind howled, and the rustling leaves seemed to whisper secrets she couldn't understand. She tried to shake the feeling, but the forest felt alive, like it was watching her. "It's just the remnants of the house," she thought. But deep down, she knew the truth. The house wasn't done with her. She had only scratched the surface. A distant sound broke through her thoughts, a soft whisper that seemed to call her name. She hesitated, but then walked on, pushing the fear down. Whatever lay ahead, she had to face it. As Nora ventured further, she felt a presence behind her, not from the trees or the wind, but from something else, something darker. The whispers had returned, not in her mind but from the woods themselves. They were no longer faint, but clear, distinct. "Come back," they seemed to say. She turned quickly, but there was nothing there. The forest was empty, save for the rustling of the leaves. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling. It was like the house had followed her here, its curse never truly lifted. She quickened her pace, but the feeling of being followed intensified. Every shadow seemed to move, every rustle seemed deliberate. She couldn't outrun it, couldn't escape the evil that had taken root in her soul. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening now, and Nora's breath came in ragged gasps. She knew she couldn't outrun this. The darkness, the demon, it wasn't just in the house. It was in her. It had always been a part of her. She had thought she could leave it behind, but now she realized that wasn't possible. The forest, the wind, the night, they were all part of the same nightmare. She had no choice but to face it. The path before her darkened, the trees seeming to close in on her. She stopped, her heart pounding in her chest. "What do you want from me?" she whispered into the night, but the only response was the chilling silence of the woods. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a loud, sharp crack. Nora's head snapped up, and she saw a figure standing in the distance, barely visible through the fog. It was the shape of a man, tall and unnaturally still. The whispers faded, replaced by the sound of her own heartbeat. She knew who it was. The demon. It had come for her again. This time she wouldn't run. This time, she would face it. She took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. She had fought it before, and she could do it again. But this time she wasn't just fighting for her life. She was fighting for her soul. The figure stepped forward, and the wind began to howl once more. The final confrontation had begun.